Hi guys, welcome back to Mer Murder, where we put the Mer in murder. I am your host, Mercedes Rose, and I'm so happy you guys are here for another week. If it sounds like I'm smiling, I am. Not only because I love you guys and I'm so thankful that you're here, but because we have to get right into this, because I have something I need to get off my chest. And it's not something I need to get off my chest, it's something I need to complain about. It's something that I'm upset about. It kind of pertains to our case today, but when I was a kid, abused terribly. Okay, I'm sorry. No, all jokes aside, I wasn't allowed to watch SpongeBob. You're going to see how this ties into our case in a little bit. But I wasn't allowed to watch SpongeBob at my dad's house. My parents weren't together, but at my dad's house, I wasn't allowed to watch SpongeBob. At my mom's, I was. However, I think I still missed a lot of very pivotal SpongeBob moments, a lot of iconic moments. According to my father, who will rue the day for this behavior, I was not allowed to watch SpongeBob because he didn't want me to imitate the things that I saw on TV. I'm not exactly sure the correlation because they were aquatic animals underwater and I was a little girl on land. I'm not really sure what he thought I was going to see, that I wasn't allowed to watch SpongeBob, but I wasn't allowed to watch it. And I feel like I missed so much. And it's so annoying because my boyfriend is always like, oh yeah, you wouldn't know what I'm talking about because you didn't watch SpongeBob. I watched SpongeBob. I watched it. Okay, guys, I watched SpongeBob at my mom's house, but I don't think I remember or retained enough of it. So sometimes, like, people or my boyfriend, somebody will talk about, like, a SpongeBob scene or, like, oh, remember this from SpongeBob? And I'm like, vaguely. And guess who wants to stroll up and be like, yep, it's good you didn't watch SpongeBob. You know who I'm talking to. You know exactly who I'm talking to right now. But I want my father to know that he ruined my whole life. And I'm just kidding. But yeah, you guys will see how that little short fun fact, not so fun fact about me pertains to my story in just a few. But before we get into today's case, I just want to thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for your support. Thank you so much for tuning in every week. Thank you so much for rating the show, leaving your comments and likes. Thank you for subscribing. If you aren't catching on, I'm thanking you for doing stuff that I hope you do right now. But yeah, no, thank you guys so much. If there's anything I want you guys to know is that I love you all so much. I appreciate you all so much. And yeah, that's it. Let's get into today's case. Many parents concern themselves with the kind of media that their children may be taking in. A lot of what they see on TV and on the internet can be inappropriate and sometimes violent, and children are like sponges. All they do is soak in information and behaviors that they're exposed to. But what children tend to lack is a general understanding of what they see as real or fake. And unfortunately, that is what happened in today's case. Today, we will be covering the murder of 6-year-old Tiffany Eunick at the hands of her family friend, 12-year-old Lionel Tate. Tiffany Eunick was born on August 26, 1992 to her mother Deweese Eunick in Jamaica, and Tiffany was remembered as a playful and bright little girl. The mother and daughter duo lived in Jamaica for a couple of years before moving to Florida, and it's unclear when exactly Deweese met Kathleen Tate, but the two women formed a close relationship as they were both divorcees and often helped each other with their kids. I couldn't find much regarding the dynamics of the mothers and their children, but from what I read, they got along very well. Lionel Tate, who was Kathleen Tate's son, and Tiffany were just a few years apart and basically grew up together, becoming so close they referred to one another as cousins and referred to each other's mothers as aunts. But unfortunately, the lives that the mothers wished for their children would take two totally devastating turns. Deweese was often away from home, traveling all around the country for days on end due to her having a job as a flight attendant. But Tiffany was only 6 years old, so she wasn't able to stay home alone. So obviously she would often be placed under the care of Kathleen Tate, as Deweese trusted her most with her daughter. And frankly, there weren't many options considering most of her family didn't live in the same country. But sadly, her trust would be broken indefinitely on one fateful night, on July 28, 1999. That Wednesday night, Tiffany was staying at Kathleen's house and spent the night playing with Lionel and watching TV. Kathleen, who worked as a Florida Highway Patrol trooper, had an overnight shift to make it to, so she fed the children dinner before going upstairs to take a nap before work. As the two kids were no longer under supervision, they began watching the WCW Thunder, an American professional wrestling program similar to the commonly known wrestling program WWE. Most, if not all, of us know that these wrestling programs are not only scripted but performed by professionals who do live stunts rather than actual fighting. So in fewer words, the combat that the audience sees is fake. but younger audience members like Lionel don't exactly know that. Matter of fact, when I was younger, maybe 8 or 9, I also thought that the WWE was real. My brother is a huge fan and watches the program to this day, and most of my older cousins watched the show growing up and still do. And I vividly remember learning when I was probably 12 or 13 that everything was fake. So I can understand how young kids would think that these stunts and fights are real, especially to an age of like 13, especially into your early teens when you're not really thinking about if this is real or fake or not. You're just seeing TV and you're just watching it. You're not really thinking like, no, this can't be real, at that age especially. But anyway, 12-year-old Lionel was watching the WCW Thunder program alongside his younger cousin Tiffany that night. And at some point, he got the terrible idea to perform some of the moves he saw on screen on little Tiffany. Now, an average 12-year-old stands anywhere from 4'6" to 5 feet and weighs about 89 pounds. But Lionel wasn't your average 12-year-old. During the time of this story, he stood at around 5'4" and weighed a whopping 166 pounds. Tiffany was half his age and only about a third of his size, weighing just 48 pounds at this time. And the moves he performed on her were far from light or fake. Shortly after returning to her bedroom, Kathleen heard what she described as weird noises, but she assumed that the children were just roughhousing or playing around. The mother yelled from upstairs for the children to quiet down whatever they were doing, as she needed to get rest before her shift. But just 45 minutes later, Kathleen was awoken again, but this time by her son Lionel directly. He informed his mother that Tiffany was downstairs and that she wasn't breathing. Kathleen immediately called 911 to try to get help for Tiffany, and the little girl, who was unresponsive, was rushed to the ER. Kathleen also called Deweese to inform her that Tiffany wasn't breathing, and she asked if she had asthma or any sort of respiratory issues. In complete fear and shock, Deweese explained to Kathleen, as well as emergency responders, that Tiffany did not have asthma or any issues with her breathing, ever. But unfortunately, shortly after receiving this phone call, she was informed that her 6-year-old daughter, Tiffany Eunick, had passed away shortly after arriving at the hospital. Now, upon first glance, investigators on the scene assumed that Tiffany's death was accidental, but after some further investigating, their minds began to change. Tiffany had visible bruising on her legs, feet, and neck. The bruising was so bad that investigators compared them to those of someone who was hit by a speeding car. And after interrogating Lionel about what happened before he noticed Tiffany wasn't breathing, the truth became clearer. Lionel initially stated that Tiffany jumped from the staircase in the home and accidentally landed on her chest, causing her to knock herself unconscious. But after a few more attempts at getting the full story, Lionel admitted to pretty much beating Tiffany to death. He told officers the two were, quote, play fighting, and that he swung the little girl into a railing, dropped her onto the floor where she had hit her head on a nearby table, punched, kicked, and stomped on her for what they would later find out to be almost 5 minutes straight, all in attempts to reenact moves that he saw on television that night. Detectives were stunned when they found out this information, but the story was further solidified after the autopsy on Tiffany Eunick was completed. The 6-year-old's death was ruled a homicide, and the manner was multiple severe blunt force traumas. The coroner found 35 distinct injuries, most notably a fractured skull, swelling of the brain, internal hemorrhaging, lacerations to her liver so severe that a portion of it was detached, and a fractured rib. The coroner also noted that the severity of her injuries could be attributed to a high-rise drop. On August 11, 1999, 2 weeks after Tiffany's murder, 12-year-old Lionel Tate was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The news of this incident, and especially the arrest, shocked the nation. People couldn't understand how a little 12-year-old boy could be charged with first-degree murder, but they would soon find out more during the trial. Before the trial, Lionel was actually offered a plea deal where if he pled guilty to a lesser charge of second-degree murder, he would be charged as a juvenile and sentenced to 3 years in prison. Now, it's unclear why his mother, Kathleen, advised him to turn down the deal, but he did. And this resulted in his removal from the juvenile court jurisdiction and indictment by a grand jury where Lionel would be tried for first-degree murder as an adult. Lionel Tate's trial began on January 16, 2001, and he was just 13 years old. The defense argued that Lionel was simply playing too rough with Tiffany and used what is now known as the wrestling defense. They insisted that Lionel, being a child, was simply imitating the things he saw on television. He wasn't aware of his own strength and that he certainly had no intent to kill Tiffany that night. According to Lionel's team, this was all a terrible accident. But the prosecution argued differently. They pointed out the severity of Tiffany's injuries and stated that this was no accident. And under Florida's felony murder rule, a person can still be found guilty of any degree of murder regardless of their intent to kill. They argued that although Lionel may not have intended to kill Tiffany, he did intend to do grievous bodily harm to her, which resulted in her death. Some background was also provided on Tate and his upbringing. It was revealed that Lionel was becoming somewhat of a school bully around this time. He was often well behaved for his teachers and in front of authority figures, but when no one was looking, he was aggressive towards other children and often used his size to intimidate others. This behavior was brought up to his mother multiple times by school officials, and Kathleen was actually well aware of her son's behavior. It's stated that in 1996, Lionel, who was 8 or 9 years old at the time, was sent by Kathleen to Mississippi to live with some relatives. Prior to this, teachers informed the mother that Lionel was a good kid, but he seemed attention-starved and had moments where he acted out, so I'm guessing he was sent to live with a stricter family member to discipline him. Now, this is actually a pretty common practice, especially in Caribbean households where parents will send their kids to their grandparents or great aunts and uncles in a different state and sometimes country to learn discipline and experience a different, more traditional way of life. But let's just be honest, oftentimes that's just code for abuse. It's kind of like a scared straight type of discipline where physical abuse teaches children to fear authority, be more submissive, and just do what they're told. I feel like a lot of parents who do this just don't want to handle the burden of disciplining their child and don't want direct responsibility for their kids' trauma, especially when it comes to physical abuse, so they basically just get somebody else to do it. And remember, Kathleen is a single mom with a son. I'm sure it got challenging at times, especially when she realized her son was a lot bigger than anticipated. But that doesn't make it right or okay, and only God knows what Lionel learned and experienced during his time in Mississippi, because upon his return to Florida, Kathleen noticed his behavior began to change, and not for the better. This is where he started becoming a bully to other children, and it was stated that even though his behavior was brought up to his mother, Kathleen would oftentimes show up to the school in full uniform in a way to intimidate the school staff and argue that her son wasn't the problem. Now, after all the evidence was presented to the court, the jury deliberated for only 3 hours, and Lionel Tate was found guilty of first-degree murder on January 25th, 2001, just a week after the trial began and just 5 days before his 14th birthday. On March 9, 2001, 14-year-old Lionel Tate was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, becoming the youngest American citizen in modern U.S. history to be sentenced life without parole. At sentencing, Broward County Circuit Judge Joel T. Lazarus stated, quote, "The acts of Lionel Tate were not playful acts of a child. The acts of Lionel Tate were cold, callous, and incredibly cruel." Lionel was initially sent to the adult prison's South Florida Reception Center located near Miami, where he spent the first 3 days of his sentence. But eventually, Lionel was moved to the maximum security Okeechobee Juvenile Offender Center almost 140 miles away in Okeechobee, Florida. After the news of his sentencing broke, there was immense outrage from the public. People felt that the sentence was too harsh for a 12 to 14-year-old boy, and that kids do reckless things all the time without truly knowing the consequences that their actions could bring. And the conclusion of this case also brought a lot of attention to how juveniles are treated in the justice system, especially in Florida. There were protests and constant criticism of the lawyers and judge from the public, especially because Lionel was a young black teen, and the public felt that his story was another case of mistreatment and excessively harsh punishment on black people in the judicial system. This time was especially painful for Tiffany's family, especially Deweese, who felt as though the public was downplaying her daughter's murder. But in a twist of events, the prosecution in Lionel's case joined his defense team in getting leniency for him. Judge Lazarus condemned the prosecution's lawyers and stated that if they felt life without the possibility of parole was too harsh of a sentence for Lionel, then they shouldn't have charged him with murder in the first place. The judge felt as though their actions compromised the integrity of the adversarial system. And despite these feelings, Lionel and his team continued on their fight for leniency. On January 25, 2004, Lionel, who was now 16 years old, was offered and accepted virtually the same plea deal he was initially offered before his original trial began. 3 years in prison for a guilty plea to second-degree murder. The difference this time around would be that the 3 years have already been served, so this plea basically granted Tate freedom from prison. And although Deweese learned to forgive Lionel for his actions and she didn't want to see another child lose their life in a different way, she was still upset that Lionel would be able to get a second chance, especially because Tiffany, who would have been about 11 years old around this time, would never get the same opportunity. During one of the plea hearings, DeWeese stated, quote, "This was not child's play. This was not roughhousing. This was a brutal murder." But the appeals court would eventually throw out Lionel's conviction, ultimately due to the fact that the young man did not receive a competency hearing before or during his trial in 2001. On January 29, 2004, just one day before his 17th birthday, Lionel Tate was a free man. The terms of Lionel's plea were 3 years jail time, which he already served, 1 year of house arrest with an ankle monitor, and 10 years probation. And although DeWeese learned to forgive Lionel and was happy he wouldn't spend the rest of his life in prison, she still wanted him to publicly acknowledge his actions and apologize to her and her family for Tiffany's murder. And even though Kathleen, Lionel's mother, apologized numerous times in public and private to Tiffany's family, this still wasn't enough to DeWeese. She felt as though he was hiding behind his mother instead of taking accountability for his actions, and thought that this would set a bad example for teens and young men just like him. Now, you would think that this is where our case would come to an end. Lionel is free and now has the ability to turn his life around and properly integrate back into society. But this is not the case. In September of 2004, 8 months following his release, 18-year-old Lionel was arrested after violating his probation as he was found to be wandering late at night past his curfew, and upon his arrest, officers found a knife in Lionel's possession. He was taken to Broward County Jail, where he was held without bond, and a judge eventually sentenced him to another 5 additional years in probation. Then, on May 23, 2005, Lionel ordered 4 pizzas from a local Domino's at around 3 p.m. And just before 4 p.m., delivery driver Walter Gallardo arrived at the residence where the pizzas were supposed to be delivered. Upon reaching the front door of an apartment unit, Walter was ambushed at gunpoint by Lionel, who demanded that the man give him whatever money he had on him. Walter was so frightened he dropped the pizzas and immediately fled the scene, returning to his car and driving back to the Domino's where he called the police to report the robbery. Lionel was arrested that same day and brought in for questioning, where he confessed to the robbery as well as being in possession of a firearm. It was also later discovered in the investigation that Lionel had also battered a 12-year-old resident of the apartment where he committed his crimes at. Apparently, the 12-year-old was a friend of his. I'm not sure how a 12-year-old and an 18-year-old became friends, but Lionel went to his apartment where the little boy lived, and he beat him up in an attempt to subdue the boy so that he could use his apartment to carry out the robbery. Ultimately, Lionel was charged with robbery and pleaded no contest in February of 2008. On February 19th, he was sentenced to 10 years for the robbery and another 30 years to be served concurrently for the violation of his parole and possession of a firearm. It is alleged that the firearm used in the robbery belonged to his mother, who reported 3 of her work service firearms missing the day of the robbery. And this brings us to Lionel Tate today. As of August 2026, Lionel Tate is 38 years old and sits in the Santa Rosa Correctional Facility in Milton, Florida, about a 9-hour drive from where he originally lived in the beginning of the story in Miramar, Florida. Lionel is scheduled to be released from prison on April 15th, 2030. Before we wrap up today's case, I would like us to take a moment to remember little Tiffany Eunick. It's a shame that the circumstances of her death were overshadowed by the controversy of Lionel's conviction, because at the end of the day, Tiffany was brutally murdered. She spent her final moments confused as to why she was even being attacked and in immense pain. Imagine her final thoughts and the fear she felt as she realized that Lionel was going to kill her. And she probably didn't even understand that those were her final moments either. She was only 6 years old. For anyone to downplay Lionel's actions simply due to his age is extremely unfair, and Tiffany deserved better. I can understand the outspoken desire for fair treatment in the justice system, especially for Black boys and men. But when real harm is done, I think the priority should be respecting the wishes of the family and respecting their feelings in this case. Tiffany's family will never be able to hug and kiss her again. They'll never be able to watch her grow up, attend her wedding, watch her have kids and a family of her own, or become a successful woman. These are all opportunities that Lionel still has even after he's released from prison. So I wish at the same time everyone was more mindful of the fact that Lionel wasn't the main focus of this story. It was and still is Tiffany. I know her mother was able to eventually forgive Lionel, but imagine the pain of hearing that so many people want your child's murderer free. I have an immense amount of respect for DeWeese. It takes a lot of courage and strength and just the purest heart to be able to forgive someone who did something so horrible to you. And I wish nothing but peace and closure to Tiffany's family, and I hope Tiffany knows just how loved and missed she really is. And with that, we are now in the part of our episode where we do the police/detective rating and the judge/jury rating. For the police and detectives, I will give them a B in this case because it was pretty average work. I really don't think there was anything they had to do. Like, Lionel confessed to everything. All they really had to do was charge him. The judge and jury now. For this case, I'm going to include the lawyers from both sides in the rating, but first I will start with the judge and jury. Do I think life was extremely harsh? Yes. But was there really a choice? No. So I can't really grade them off of like, oh, they were just being so harsh and evil and mean. At the end of the day, the prosecutors charged him with first-degree murder. If they felt that life without parole would have been harsh or too harsh for someone that age, they could have easily worked out another plea deal. They could have done any other charge. Like, it was like they thought that a gun was being held to their head and they had to charge him with that. So the judge and jury had no choice but to give him life without the possibility of parole. In any other world, I would be like, that was extremely unfair and that was wrong of them, but they really had no choice. Like, they had to give him this sentence. There was no minimum. The only option was life. So yeah. At the end of the day, Lionel was offered a plea deal and he was ill-advised to reject it. I don't really know what his mother's plan was. Maybe she thought because he was young, he probably would have just gotten off, or I don't know, maybe she wanted him to sit in prison because he was acting up. But that little boy should not have been able to make that decision on his own. I think he should have received somewhere between 10 to 20 years. Like, at the end of the day, that wasn't an option, yes, but if it was, I think he could have gotten like 10 to 20 years with real rehabilitation. We always forget that prison is really supposed to be rehabilitation and it's not just punishment for you to sit and rot. And that's why I think he must have left prison and decided he wanted to continue his crimes and, you know, rob people and batter people. I don't think he got real rehabilitation. And I can only imagine the prison system in Florida. I hear the craziest things about Florida, period. But I hear the craziest things, especially Broward County. I hear the craziest things about that jail, that prison, all of that. I do not think he had a chance when it came to rehabilitation in there. I think ideally they should have put him in a juvenile prison till he was 18 and got him some real psychological help, probably got him to talk through his trauma and work through the things that he was feeling and the issues he had. And then they could have determined if he could be set free or not. But yeah, him declining his plea offer was really bad. With the rules of Florida's felony murder conviction, he really had no other option besides life. So I don't think it's the judge and the jury's fault at the end of the day. And I will be giving them a B+ because they did their jobs at the end of the day. And it's not their fault that the sentencing was so harsh. It was literally the only option. But for the lawyers in the case, like I said, I was going to divide them. I'm giving them a C- because I believe the defense did an awful job at really preparing Lionel and ensuring that he understood his position in the case and what was really at risk. They definitely should have made sure that a competency hearing was conducted before and during the trial because Lionel was only 12. I'm 23 and I barely understand what half of these terms and conditions mean in court proceedings. And I also do research on this stuff in my free time. So I can only imagine what little a 12-year-old understood about what was happening, especially when you can't really comprehend the difference between real and fake. I think me at 12 years old would be like, oh, this is just a movie. Like, this is just not real. Like, this can't be my life. But I was also very conscious at 12. So maybe me at like 8 would be like, oh, this isn't real. This is just fake. Like, I think I'm just here for pretend and play. And then I'd be in prison with adults. Like, that's crazy. And I think the prosecution is just as wrong because they knew damn well that life without the possibility of parole was insane for a 12-year-old. Like I said, at the end of the day, we're not going to downplay Lionel's actions. He beat Tiffany to death. He murdered a 6-year-old little girl, and that is heinous and disgusting at the end of the day. But when you're 12 years old, you really do not comprehend the things that you're doing. If he really was some evil, psychologically twisted, horrible little kid, they could have really done some psych evaluations. They could have done the competency hearings. They could have really tried to understand what was really going on in this little boy's brain. I don't think he deserved life. Life without parole is insane. He's 12. He can't legally do anything yet. Like, that's insane. So yeah, shame on the prosecution, shame on the defense. I'm giving them both a C-. I think that's fair. They easily could have charged him with a lesser crime if they were going to double back and be like, actually no, this was really harsh, and then join his team to get him leniency. Like, they could have easily just charged him with something different from the jump. They wasted everybody's time at the end of the day. And then if he was in there longer, like say he got second degree, say he got manslaughter or something, he probably would have gotten 10 to 15 years, and then he probably would have actually stayed there. And then he wouldn't have been able to rob another man and then batter another little kid. Like, that's just insane. And I think that also goes to talk about probably where he's stunted, because how is an 18-year-old friends with a 12-year-old? If you think about it, when he was 12, he was wrapped up in all of this court and legal stuff, and then he missed out on a lot of his childhood, and then he was thrust into this adult world in prison. So I can only imagine that he was stunted, and maybe that's how he was friends with a 12-year-old. That's weird. That's really weird. Let's actually talk about that for a second, because this is kind of off topic, sorry. Not really, but it's not based on the case at all. We'll get back to that in a second, but I don't think people really comprehend age. I've been seeing, so I commented on TikTok. There was this clip from Streamer University, the Crystal girl. I don't really watch streamers. I don't really know them like that, but there's this girl, Crystal. She's funny, she's cute, whatever. She's 19. Her boyfriend is 27 years old. The clip I saw was a girl being like, oh, that's your boyfriend? And people thought she was being messy by being like, oh, he's too attractive for her. But she said, like, that's a grown man. And people were like, oh my gosh, she's just being messy. Oh my gosh, she just don't think that she can pull him. You should not be able to pull a 27-year-old man when you're 19. That's fucking weird. That's creepy as shit. So I commented and I said, and one thing about me, my TikTok comments go triple ultra diamond in the streets, okay? People are gonna see my comments. So I commented, 19 and 27 is crazy as fuck, y'all. Like ASF, you know. And I have all these little ass kids commenting, oh, that's not that crazy. That's not even insane. They're both adults, by the way. Somebody commented at me, my dad graduated high school before my mom was even born. It's not that weird. You guys are all victims. I'm so sorry. And it's easy. And people were telling me, like, the people that I was bringing this up to, like, they were agreeing. I don't keep creeps in my life. I don't keep creeps and weirdos in my circle, trust. But they were saying, like, younger people think, like, oh, it's not a big deal. You're young. You just be doing stupid stuff. And, like, they can't really comprehend. I understand that, but we're not going to sit here and promote it either. We're not going to sit here and be like, oh, that's not that weird. My mom was 6 when my dad was 75. What the fuck? And then I hate the alternative where people are like, oh, but if it was a woman, you guys wouldn't care. Yes, I still would. Oh, but y'all don't think 30 and 42 is weird. Yes, I do. Like, nothing you say makes it less weird. Because at the end of the day, someone's a victim. Like, someone is a victim, whether it's a man, whether it's a woman, whether the age gap is 19 to 27 versus 45 to 62. That's still weird. You're still robbing somebody of their youth. You're still taking advantage of somebody. That man is pushing 30 and she can't even legally drink yet. That's weird. That is weird. I think he has her name tatted. Like, the type of psychological abuse that they don't even know they're facing right now, that's why we're not going to make this shit regular, because that's not normal. Like, let's look at the David and Celeste case right now. Everybody is so gung-ho, like, yeah, he was 19, she was 13, that was weird, he knows so much more than her, she was a child, that's manipulation. That's not that different, and I don't mean this in any sort of disrespect, but that's not that different from Crystal being with somebody who 27 and she's 19. That's weird. Y'all can't just pick and choose when that type of stuff is weird. It's weird at the end of the day. It's weird when one person did it, and it's weird when the next person doesn't. It's weird when the person's a man. It's weird when the person's a woman. It's weird when they're 45, when they're 70, when they're 30, when they're 50. It's weird no matter what. The day that we can all sit down and agree on one thing is when we'll be able to start standing on things, and I will always stand on that. I don't care how many more people comment at me. Oh, it's not even that bad. Oh, you were young once and did stupid stuff. Yes, of course. But that doesn't make it okay. So many people grow up and realize that they were either abused or groomed or taken advantage of. And I don't want us to sit here and have these examples and think it's okay. Because now that girl has a platform and she's a streamer and she has all these other 19 and 18 and 17. And we know there's kids on the internet. Like, people will be like, oh, 2016 must have been such a fun time to be a teenager. I'm like, what the hell? When were you born? They were born in like 2015. Oh my God, that makes me sick. But we share this space and this internet with people that are so young and so impressionable. And I do not want us to sit here and set a standard that it's okay for people to be 10 years apart, 8 years apart, 6 years apart. Oh, just because they're both grown and legal. That's fucking weird. Stop setting that example. I really hope that Crystal girl wakes up one day and realizes that she's, I don't want to call her a victim because that's really messed up, but I want her to realize that she's being taken advantage of. Like, she is so beautiful. She's funny. She has a bright future ahead of her. She doesn't need to, what 30-year-old needs to be dating a 19-year-old? I'm so sorry. This tangent is getting crazy, but it's like, I just need people to really use their common sense. That's not normal. She has a very bright future ahead of her, and she cannot let somebody who's a loser. I don't know the man. I don't know, but I think if you're 30 dating somebody like 10 years younger than you, I think you're weird. I think you're weird. I think you're a loser. There's something wrong with you. You must not have a lot going for yourself that you're dating somebody that's so much younger than you. That's weird. And we're not going to make that normal. And I got nothing nice to say about that. But yeah, sorry guys, I got really off topic. I have no idea where we even left off. Let me think. Yeah, my rating for the judge and the jury, my rating for the lawyers in the case is a C-. I just think that, everybody did a bad job. Sorry, I'm so off topic now. I'm gonna have to wrap that up right there. That was my little 2 cents on that. Hopefully nobody comes for me on the internet because I don't like that type of stuff. I don't even think anybody's gonna hear that anyway. Ooh, that's like famous last words. But yeah, guys, that is the end of today's case. My sources for this week's case have been abcnews.com, cnn.com, heraldtribune.com, jlc.org, nsuworks.nova.edu, newyorktimes.com, omct.org, orlandocentennial.com, and wikipedia.org. So yeah, guys, that is it from me. Thank you all so much for listening. I'm sorry for the I'm going to stop saying sorry. I'm going to stop saying sorry when it's things that I believe in and things that I really want to stand up for. But I didn't mean to take away from Tiffany's case. I didn't mean to go on a tangent like that. But I do think things are very important to confront and talk about and discuss right now. And those are one of the really important things to me. I think that we should all protect each other, be honest with one another and ourselves, and be real, and stop standing up for things that we know is not right. Like, we know that's not right. That is the only way we can help make this world a better place. I would have a whole lot less stories to talk about if we did things like sit on our principles and told each other when things were right and wrong and when we were honest with one another, because a lot of these things would not be happening. A lot of these cases would not be something I could be telling you if we were just honest from jump and we stood on the principles that we all believe in and value and know are right. So yeah, I love you guys so much. Thank you all so much for the support. Don't forget to follow the show on Instagram. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to like, comment, interact with the show in any way that you can. I really appreciate all you guys so much. So yeah, thank you guys so much for joining me this week. And I can't wait to see you all next week as we put the Mer in murder. Bye.